On October 1st, 2025, history was written in Ouagadougou. The African Economic and Security Summit had drawn leaders from across West Africa. Flags from a dozen nations lined the stage. Motorcades crowded the streets. Journalists jostled for seats in the press gallery. The day was meant to be another round of cautious speeches, declarations of unity, and diplomatic formalities. But when President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso rose to speak, the air in the hall changed. At 36, he was the youngest head of state in the room. He was not dressed in expensive suits or wrapped in long-winded speeches. His tone was steady, but the weight of his words struck like a hammer. He said Africa would begin limiting its cooperation with China. The room fell into silence. No applause, no murmurs. Even the translators in their booths hesitated. Delegates turned to each other, whispering, had they heard correctly? Could a leader from one of the smallest and poorest nations on the continent really challenge Beijing in front of the entire region? Within hours, his statement had flashed across the world. News agencies in Washington, Paris, London, and Beijing scrambled to publish headlines. Analysts debated on live television. Was this the beginning of a new African policy? Or was it a gamble that could cost Burkina Faso dearly? But Traoré had not spoken lightly. His words came with a case. 4 clear reasons Africa must stand on its own. The first was debt. For 2 decades, Africa had borrowed from China under the Belt and Road Initiative. By 2020, the total exceeded $150 billion. New highways cut across deserts, bridges spanned rivers, airports and stadiums rose in capitals from Lusaka to Addis Ababa. But every project came with interest. Every loan carried terms hidden behind polished agreements. When repayments faltered, sovereignty slipped away. Traoré pointed to Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, surrendered to China after debt defaults. Do not think it cannot happen here, he warned. It already has. Only we have not yet seen the full price. The second was resources. Our minerals, he said, flow like rivers, but they do not flow to our people. He named them one by one. 70% of the world's cobalt from Congo, 60% of Zambia's copper, over half of Angola's oil. Shipments moved day and night east to China, while African factories stood idle. We are exporting our lifeblood, he said, and importing poverty. The third was militarization. In 2017, China opened its first overseas military base in Djibouti. Officially, it was for logistics and peacekeeping. But more than 2,000 troops now operated near the Red Sea, guarding the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Uniforms marked with peace, Traoré cautioned, can at any time become uniforms of control. The fourth was digital dependence. Over 40 nations in Africa now relied on Chinese telecom giants Huawei and ZTE for their 4G and 5G networks. Surveillance systems, cameras, software, monitoring hubs were already installed in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Colonialism no longer arrives with armies, he said. It arrives with antennas and cables, with contracts written in languages our people never see. Then he delivered his conclusion. It was not a whisper, it was thunder. We once lived under France. We once bowed to the IMF. We once yielded to America. If we are not vigilant today, we will become the new colony of China. Gasps filled the room. Some delegates applauded. Others stayed stone-faced. The cameras caught it all. But Traoré did not stop there. Days later, he flew east to Beijing. Beneath the chandeliers of the Great Hall of the People, he sat across from China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Premier Li Qiang. They reminded him of $200 billion in infrastructure. They spoke of dams, power plants, hospitals. They insisted these were gestures of friendship, not tools of control. Traoré did not bend. Looking directly across the polished table, he said, "This is not friendship. This is a golden trap." The words echoed through the continent. They played on news channels again and again. Clips circulated on phones from Dakar to Nairobi. Students replayed the line in classrooms. For many Africans, it was the first time a leader had said aloud what they felt in their bones. Beijing responded with speed. Loans for Zambia and Ethiopia were postponed. Trade restrictions tightened on Ghana. Investments in Mali froze overnight. The message was clear: resist and you will pay. But something unexpected happened. Instead of isolating Burkina Faso, China's punishment lit a fire across the Sahel. In Bamako and Niamey, officials praised Traoré's courage. In Ouagadougou, Parliament passed a resolution declaring his words a second independence. Crowds filled the streets waving flags, chanting his name. For the first time in decades, fear shifted direction. The ripple went further. In Washington, Donald Trump repeated his old phrase, "China is sucking the blood of Africa." In Paris, Emmanuel Macron warned Europe that Beijing's rise in Africa carried consequences for the West as well. Analysts in Brussels and Berlin debated whether Europe should support this new independence drive. Suddenly, Africa was no longer the silent stage of great power competition. It was becoming an actor in its own story. At home, Traoré became more than a president. He became a symbol. Social media turned his face into posters, memes, banners. Young Africans saw in him not only a leader, but a voice for their generation. Yet symbols, he reminded them, were not enough. "Defiance is not victory," he said. "We must build." And build they did. Within weeks, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Ghana announced a joint telecom initiative. Its purpose, to break dependence on Huawei and ZTE. Backed by diaspora engineers, the project promised cheaper, safer, locally managed networks. Universities in Accra and Ouagadougou launched new programs in cybersecurity and telecom engineering. Students who once dreamed of leaving now found reasons to stay. Within months, China lost its first major African telecom contract, worth more than $3 billion. The political weather changed too. In Burkina Faso, lawmakers invoked the memory of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary of the 1980s who declared that Africa would never pay illegitimate debts. Citizens marched with portraits of Sankara and Traoré side by side, chanting Second Liberation. In Mali and Niger, civic groups called for audits of Chinese projects. In Ghana, radio hosts debated whether their nation should deepen its ties with the AES bloc. The diaspora added force. In Atlanta, New York, and Houston, African communities organized rallies and forums. Churches, alumni groups, and cultural associations raised funds for African-led initiatives. For the first time in decades, Africans abroad felt that a leader at home was not simply managing crisis, but shaping destiny. Governments followed the people. Ghana considered canceling surveillance contracts. Nigeria renegotiated loans. Even Ethiopia, China's closest partner, quietly explored alternatives. The real change was not in contracts, it was in mindset. Africans began to believe they could own their future. Out of this momentum came the African Diaspora Development Network, ADDN. 23 nations signed on. Its charter was simple but revolutionary. Africa's resources must serve Africa first. Copper, cobalt, oil, none would leave without clear benefits to local people. Diaspora wealth and expertise would fund industries, universities, and clean energy. Projects would be smaller than Beijing's megadeals, but they would be African-owned, African-led, African-funded. For China, it was a shock. For the West, an opening. For Africa, a declaration, we will no longer be anyone's pawn. Again and again, Traoré reminded audiences, this is not about me. This is about a generation. But his image, young, defiant, unshakable, had already become the face of a rising continent. The golden trap had been refused. In its place, a golden path was being built. 1 kilometer of fiber, 1 classroom, 1 power station at a time. What began as a single speech in Ouagadougou had become a movement stretching from Sahelian deserts to diaspora cities across the Atlantic. In markets and classrooms, in mosques and churches, the message spread. Sovereignty is not given, it is seized. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as a small, landlocked nation, now stood at the heart of Africa's second liberation.